Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Khalid, for presenting these lectures and holding them. Inshallah, the attendance will be taken in today for the first time. We will send in a link into the YouTube comment section. So if you would just fill in the form to take in your attendance. If you have any questions throughout the lecture, just place them into the comment section and we will try to answer them at the end of the session. If we do not have enough time to answer all your questions at the end of the session, we will hold a separate Q&A session later on, inshallah. And thank you everyone for joining once again, and inshallah we can start when you're ready, Dr. Khalid.
Okay, thank you very much for this introduction, and we're looking forward to your engagement during this lecture. We'll first start with a quick review of what we've covered last week, and then we will talk today about the ancient history of the Holy Land, of Bayt al-Maqdis, of this blessed land. If you recall, during last week, we had a detailed discussion about the engagement and the importance of Al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis. We started talking about the Nakba, that the Nakba didn't just start in 1948. It actually started with the British occupation, who saw this as part of their colonialist crusader image, as you have seen in the discussion. But what we said is that the most dangerous part is not the occupation of the land, but it was the occupation of the land, the mind. And with the occupation of the mind, the colonialist powers have created new identities and new flags and new countries and people are associated within this nation state, and that there were multiple Nakbas, multiple catastrophes that have taken place, starting with the British occupation, the Zionist occupation in 1948 of nearly 80% of British Palestine, and then the rest of it in 1967, and this Nakba continuing. And we said the importance of not just having an emotional connection with this land, we need to have an intellectual connection and freeing our mind from this occupation. And we talked about the idea of the conquest of knowledge in order to create change and liberation and a new civilization in this land. First, we need to start working on this thing together. We talked about the names of the Holy Land, Bayt al-Maqdis as one of the earliest names, also Salim or Shalem as the earliest name used by the Canaanites, 3000 BC. We will discuss more on this, Yabus, Elia, Al-Quds al-Sharif, and many other names, and how this land was important to not just the Muslims, but not also just Christians, but also to Jews and to others. We talked about terminologies, and we said the Prophet ﷺ always used the term Bayt al-Maqdis to refer to this land, city, and the Masjid. We also talked about the Quranic terminologies, the land of Barakah and the Holy Land, or the land of Bayt al-Maqdis. And these, we have discussed the details of which that they are beyond the administrative political boundaries. These are religious boundaries related to both the city, the mosque, and the region that surrounds it. We talked about what Al-Aqsa is, and we said Al-Aqsa is neither the Golden Dome and neither the building with the copper or silvery dome, and that Al-Aqsa is everything within this site. And this was a mosque, and the boundaries of which were known even before the birth of Muhammad, or even before the birth of Jesus. As we know that the walls of Al-Aqsa Mosque existed from prior to the Roman times, before Christ. And we said within Al-Aqsa Mosque there are hundreds of monuments and hundreds of buildings. And our discussion today will focus on the timeline of Bayt al-Maqdis, starting with the Natufis, the Canaanites, and coming to the 7th century. So what we'll be covering today within our discussion is quite a long period of time. And it's important that what we are discussing here is there are two timelines. One is the Quranic Islamic timeline for this region, which we will focus on in this discussion. But at the same time, we're going to be discussing alongside it based on scientific archaeological discoveries and other timelines of rulers who have ruled within this. So what you see in the image in front of you is that the top timeline is the Quranic timeline, and we will discuss this in some detail. And the one below depicts the based on historical analysis of this period. And the starting point, which we said takes us back to the earliest connections with this land. We discussed the Muslim connection with this land in terms of it being the first Qibla, and we said what this first Qibla actually meant, that the Prophet Muhammad from the first day of his prophethood started to pray towards Bayt al-Maqdis, and many of the Sahaba were yearning towards this land and wanting to see it and wanting to visit it. And this connection that the early mosques built by Prophet Muhammad, even after his migration to Medina, were all built facing towards Bayt al-Maqdis until the Qibla changed later on. We also discussed another very important issue, which is that Al-Aqsa is the second mosque on earth. And we discussed that the Kaaba was the first mosque on earth according to the Quran, that it's been built with the first human from the time of Adam, and that the Kaaba is not the shape it is today. The Kaaba is not just a square. It used to be it's more like a rectangle, but with all the walls, even today, having different dimensions. The Kaaba used to be much longer than it was today. And then we compared between the building of the Kaaba from prior to the time of Prophet Muhammad and the building of Masjid Al-Aqsa as a whole, being very similar in their proportions, not in size because the Kaaba is much smaller, but because we said the longest wall of the Kaaba is about 16, 17 meters, but the wall of Al-Aqsa is around 488 meters. But what we compared between the Kaaba and Al-Aqsa, and what we said from an architectural point of view, that both these buildings must have been built in relation to one another. And this fits with the Islamic narrative on this, with the foundation of Al-Aqsa Mosque being built facing the Kaaba. This makes us believe that the building of Al-Aqsa came after the building of the Kaaba, and the Kaaba in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ was built prior to the building of Al-Aqsa by 40 years, according to the Sahih narration of Abu Dharr in Bukhari and Muslim, that the first building on earth was the Kaaba, the second Al-Aqsa, and between them 40 years. And the Al-Aqsa was rebuilt by many prophets and many different people throughout the different times. We also said Al-Aqsa to Muslims is one of three holy sites, not the third holiest site, because we said Al-Aqsa is number one, the first Qibla, number two, the second mosque on earth, not in relation to Muhammad, but in relation to the first prophet, Prophet Adam, and that it is one of three holy sites Muslims should set out to visit. We also discussed briefly the situation today and how the Zionists have managed to take control of the land following the British occupation in 1917, and managed to take much of the land of Bayt al-Maqdis and turn it from Bayt al-Maqdis and Palestine to Israel. And from this point, we will start our discussion today. Our discussion today focuses on the importance of Bayt al-Maqdis, and we are discussing the early historical connection with this land. So when did this land start to have an importance in the Muslim faith? And as we said also last week, that Islam does not start with Muhammad. All Muslim historians start Islam like At-Tabari and Ibn Kathir and others. It starts from the first human on earth. This raises a question. When we're looking at the narrative, the scientific narrative and the religious narrative, do they actually fit together, or do we have two separate narratives? Within the Judeo-Christian belief that Adam existed 5,000 years ago, and this conflicts with reality, because we know that humans have existed on earth much way before that. Does the Quran give us any account on the first human and the details of this? Actually, the Quran talks about Adam being created by God. And this, I will mention to you an interesting story that happened to me in a church in the UK. My father was giving a lecture about Islam in a church, and a Christian came up to me and he said, "Do you believe that Adam was the first human?" And I said, "Yes, Muslims believe that Adam was the first human." Then he said, "Then you are all fundamentalists. The idea of believing in the literal text of the Quran that Adam was the first human is problematic in Western society, because after what we call about the evolution theory and the idea that humans developed from apes or monkeys, then it is not possible that actually Adam was the first human created by God. There is a conflict between this. So Christians have bridged this gap by talking that the first human was not created by God, and we actually evolved. And the stories in the Bible and the Old Testament and are actually are mythical stories, not reality. Muslims today still hold the belief that God is the one that created Adam, because this is explicit in the Quran. However, can we bridge the idea between science and religion? Is this an issue that can be bridged within the Muslim experience? Actually, within the Muslim experience, it's actually very different from the European experience, from the Western Christian experience. Because when, as Islam developed, particularly after Prophet Muhammad in the 7th century, Muslims did not see that there is a conflict between religion and science. Actually, they saw that religion promotes science. The first verse in the Quran talks about reading and exploring this world. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق. It's talking about reading and exploring and seeing the creations of God and reading the actual words of God and putting them together. So throughout the last 1400 years, Muslims have not seen a conflict between religion and science. In reality, they saw them complementing each other, and actually that's religion promotes science and scientific discoveries. And you see this with all early Muslim scholars. They were not just scholars of religion. At the same time, they were also scholars of science. And you look at someone like Imam al-Razi, he was a scholar of tafsir and Islamic studies. And at the same time, he was a medic, and he was developing, looking into astronomy. You look at all early Muslim scholars, they study science and the Quran, and actually the Quran is the one that promotes them to study science, because the Quran all the time talks about أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ. They do not see, they do not ponder, they do not investigate, understand, and follow this. So Muslims did not see this as a conflict. However, the European experience had a massive conflict between church and knowledge. And you know what happened with the development of science in Europe, which was based on the Muslim sciences that have developed in the universities in Andalusia, in Spain, in Portugal today. And much of this was then copied into the West, with the first universities developing in, for example, the UK about 500, 600 years ago, on the basis of the knowledge that was gained from Andalusia, from the Muslims. And a very good documentary that I actually recommend that you watch on this. The BBC aired it a few years ago, When the Moors Ruled Spain, or When the Moors Ruled Europe. And this documentary shows how science and even the French Revolution was based on Muslim thought and development from Spain. The European experience of the clash between the church and science at that time, actually you can see a big shift, and then the church was sidelined, and then the idea of nation states and science developed beyond, and then we have the Industrial Revolution and so on and so forth. This came at a time when the Muslim scientific discoveries were at a decline, and Muslims were becoming stagnant in developing science and so on. So what we see within the evolution theory, which is a theory but it's taught as a fact, that humans developed from apes. However, this does not reflect the Muslim point of view. The Muslim point of view talks about that humans were actually created by God, and the first human was created by God. If I would ask you how old is humanity within the Muslim context, we do not really have an answer. But today we have discoveries that we're talking about humans existing nearly 2 million years ago, and we have various evidence of this, and we have different theories that are talking about human development over the last 200, 300 years ago, and how human movement has started within this, starting from Africa. At least this is the accepted point of view. What we find today is that there was also a very good documentary by National Geographic talking about that we can actually trace through the DNA that humans go back to super ancestors. There are super ancestors that connect humans together. It gives the example of Genghis Khan as a super ancestor and other super ancestors. And this takes us to that humans actually, based on the Y chromosome, humans go back to one single human being. So this is changing the narrative on how humans have developed. And could this be Noah, who is regarded in Islam as the second father of humanity, and the difference between that and the first human? But based on archaeological discoveries that we see within the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, within the Holy Land, we have Tel Ubaidiyah talking about the first humans who have existed. We're talking about nearly 1 million years ago within the region of the Holy Land and within the region of Palestine. So humans have existed not just 100 thousand years ago, but actually have existed hundreds of thousands of years ago. And this takes us to this area in Palestine, in the Holy Land, in Bayt al-Maqdis, Ubaydiyya or Tel Ubaydiyya, as discoveries are every day developing. So we are learning this. This is a discovery, a recent discovery of the first humans who have existed in the region of Bayt al-Maqdis that we talked about here in Tel Ubaydiyya 700,000 years ago. But this is regarded, what you see here in front of you is in South Turkey, southern Turkey. And this is regarded as the first temple built, or the first place of worship built by humans 12,000 years ago. 12,000 years ago is not a short. Generally, we know about the Stone Age, and we have Iron Age, and so on. This is changing this historical narrative that humans were actually very well advanced 12,000 years ago, and they were able to build temples, they were able to build places of worship, and they were, although this picture pictures them as primitive in what you see in front of you, but they were quite advanced in a way that they were able to cut massive rocks, place them, as you can see here, in a place called Göbekli Tepe, or in southern eastern Turkey today. But the first people to have, according to archaeology today, the first civilization or culture that has developed cities and developed houses and developed even walled cities are called the Natufians, or Natufian culture. And the Natufian culture is a culture that dates to quite an early time in history. We're talking about 10,000 BC, and they were in the area of Bayt al-Maqdis. And even before them, we have 20,000 BC, what we call the Kabaran culture. And they also existed within this region. But the Natufian culture developed cities. And the first walled city in the world today is the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho, we're talking about 9,000 years ago, is a city, a walled city that was built and developed in Jericho, not far from Jerusalem today, about 20 kilometers from Jerusalem. And this city is regarded as the first walled city in the world, and it even had at a later time double walls. So the first wall that we have, and then we have another wall that surrounds it and exists around this city. So we're talking about a very old civilizations and cultures that have existed in the area of Bayt al-Maqdis from an archaeological point of view. But from an Islamic point of view, we know that the first place that was developed in this area even comes before the Natufians and even before the Kabarians. We are talking about the region of Bayt al-Maqdis, particularly the city, and the first building being the first building being Masjid Al-Aqsa, over the rock of Bayt al-Maqdis. And Muslims believe that the first building of Al-Aqsa Mosque, as Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, as Ibn Hisham, as most Mufassirin The building of Al-Aqsa happened 40 years after the building of the Kaaba, and we discussed this last week in some detail. So, following the building of the Kaaba at the time of Prophet Adam, then Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was developed and built the time of, or at least the foundation of it would have been built at the time of Prophet Adam. And then numerous other prophets would have come to this area and worshipped God there. The first archaeological evidence of the city being developed goes back to the Canaanites. And what you see here in the image in front of you is the city of Or Salim, today in Silwan, just south of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And this is 2000 BC. The city was already a city known as Or Salim or Or Shalim. And this is the old Canaanite Arabic name for the city. The Canaanites, even within the Old Testament, are regarded as Arab tribes who moved to this area and settled within it at that time. So we know that this city existed as the city of Or Salim. It's not a Hebrew name. This existed before there was any Jew, or even the Jewish religion has even developed, or even as a nation. So today, Yerushalayim is actually coming from the Arabic name Or Salim or Shalim in Old Canaanite Arabic. And when Prophet Abraham would have come to this place from southern Iraq, as the Quran says, that he migrated with Lot to the land which God has blessed for the world. This is a depiction of what the city would have looked like. The city south of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. The Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, you can see it here on the top of the rock. I'm not sure if you're able to see my, yes. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque, and this is the city of Or Salim or Or Shalim during the migration of Abraham. And the Quran talks about this in some detail. The Quran covers the migration of Abraham, and also the Old Testament also covers that he migrates from Ur to Haran and then comes to Or Salim or Or Shalim, and he settles in Hebron. All these names are the old Canaanite names for the cities. Most of the names we have today in Palestine are actually old Canaanite names for the cities. Hebron was the name of the city of Al-Khalid during that Canaanite time. And according to the Old Testament, when Abraham came to this land, already there was a ruler who believed in God, who was a monotheist, and his name was Malik Sadiq or Malik Zadok. And the name already you can see from the name is an Arabic Canaanite name, Malik Sadiq, which means the truthful king. And Abraham, according to the Old Testament, I'm giving you the different narratives, Abraham worshipped God with him inside the area of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So the Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa existed even before the time of Prophet Abraham. And Prophet Abraham came and prayed, and it was already holy to the Canaanites, to the monotheistic Canaanites who believed in God and were worshipping him. And their city that they created, Or Salim, some say even goes back to 3000 BC. So about 5,000 years ago, this city already existed as a walled city known as Or Salim in Silwan today. So you can see the image here, the city of Or Salim also to the right, and the mountain of Bayt al-Maqdis or Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa existed further north. The Quran gives us a narrative of prophets who have lived and existed during that time. The Quran mentions 25 prophets, and most of these prophets are directly linked to the land of Bayt al-Maqdis and to the Holy Land. What we talked about, a third of the Quran is stories of prophets, most of whom, about 80% of whom, have a direct relation to this land. The Quran talks about the story of Prophet Abraham and migrating to this land and settling in this land and living in this land. And then he takes his first son, who was born in this land, Ismail, and he takes him and he leaves him with his mother next to the Kaaba. As the Quran says, he did not leave them in the middle of the desert. He left them next to the Kaaba, and he traveled back and forth to Mecca and rebuilt the Kaaba there. And some Muslim narrations say that when Ishaq was born in Bayt al-Maqdis and he grew up, also he would go and they would renovate the building of Masjid Al-Aqsa. The grandson of Ibrahim was Yaqub, and Yaqub, also known in the Quran as Israel. So he has two names, Yaqub, and also his other name is Israel. So the name Israel in the Quran is in reference to Prophet Yaqub, and the children of Yaqub are known also as the children of Israel, or Bani Israel. And this is something that is established. Also, from the children of Yaqub, we have Yusuf. He had 12 children. One of them was Yusuf. And the Quran, full chapter of the Quran is on the story of Yusuf and how his brothers threw him in the well, and how he then is taken to Egypt, and his full story is mentioned in the Quran in a lot of detail, and how he then becomes the minister of finance in Egypt, and then he brings his family to that place, to Egypt, and Yaqub, and then all the children are then coming to Egypt, and they settle in Egypt. And the Quran talks about this experience as ghayabat al-jub, that they are taken, ja'a bikum min al-badu, that they are brought from the desert, and they are living in Egypt for centuries. This is at the time of the Hyksos, and the Hyksos were the eastern governors who came and took Egypt from the pharaohs, and then they ruled this land for about a century before the pharaohs came back. And then for centuries, the children of Yaqub lived there, and they were within Egypt for a few centuries, and then they have become enslaved to the pharaohs. And the Quran talks about this in some detail, and how Moses is chosen as a prophet, and after he runs away, he grows up in the household of Pharaoh, and then he runs away to Midian, and then comes back to Egypt with two orders: to take the children of Israel out of Egypt from the slavery, and the second is to invite to the way of God. So they are invited to do this, and they are not able to leave Egypt because Pharaoh did not want them to leave. And then you know of the Quranic narrative of the various miracles and the various details that have taken place until he is he takes Bani Israel to the sea, and they think that they are going to be completely destroyed, and they cross the sea, and Pharaoh and his army are completely destroyed as the children of Israel cross to the other side. On this, as they cross into the land of Barakah, they are in the Sinai Peninsula. They are told to wait until Moses comes back to them. They start worshiping the calf, the golden calf, and then Moses is very angry with them, and eventually he takes them to the borders of the Holy Land, and he says to them, enter the Holy Land which God has ordained you to enter, and do not turn back. The Israelites refuse to do this, and they say, we will not enter, because within this land the Canaanites were mighty people, very strong people. The Quran calls them Al-Jabbarin, and they refuse to enter this land, and they are turning away from this. So then the decree of God comes that they shall never enter this land. They first say to Moses, we will not enter ever until they leave. Go with your Lord and fight, and we will sit here waiting. And then Allah says, then it shall be forbidden for them to enter. 40 years they shall wander in the land. And Moses is very upset because he has taken them, he's shown them the miracles. They saw the destruction of Pharaoh and his armies, and how God split the sea for them, and then they worship the calf, and then they go to the miqat to meet their Lord, and then they say, we want to see God, and then God destroys them. And the whole story the Quran covers in quite a lot of detail. Now they cannot enter this holy land, and they are expelled and not allowed to enter the Holy Land, which they have come so close. So they wander in the desert, in the Sinai Peninsula, for 40 years. And all this generation that refused to enter the Holy Land would not enter this land. So they are this generation that refuses to enter the Holy Land then dies in the wilderness. And the new generation that is born in the wilderness after the death of Moses, then they would go under the command of Yusha bin Nun, as the Mufassirin and the Hadith talks about him, Joshua, and they enter part of this land, and they enter from the side of Jericho. The Bible in this gives so much fantasy of how they entered this land and how they managed to enter. It is interesting how they turn this into a myth. The Quran does not give details of this, their entry. It mentions that they are told to say hitta, that God forgive us, or ask for forgiveness as they are entering this land, but they turn around and they mock God in entering this land. The Prophet Muhammad says that the sun was never held for anyone except for Yusha, the nights that he marched towards Bayt al-Maqdis. So there were certain miracles that were given to Yusha as he entered this land. Yet the Israelites were always rebellious. The children of Israel were rebellious. So after entering this land and staying there for some time, they were then forced out of this land by the Canaanites. And the Quran talks about a very interesting story. After being forced out of this land for the first time, they come to a prophet of theirs and they say, we would like to go back and fight and enter the Holy Land once again. And their prophet says, when the time for, the Quran uses the term for jihad, when the time for jihad comes, you will turn back. They said, no, why should we turn back? And we've been forced out of our land. We will, and our people and our children and our families, we want to go and fight. And the Quran mentions this story in some detail. Then their prophet says, God has chosen for you a king. And this king is Talut or Saul. He is being appointed as your king. They refuse to accept him as their king. They say he does not come from the family of kings. So thus we will not accept him as our king. So their prophet says, but God has chosen him. They say he is not. He doesn't have money. He is not from that lineage of kings. So he says, the prophet says to them, then the sign of his kingdom will be that the tabut, the tabut, or the this holy what's the word for it? I forgot the word. Tabut. It slipped my mind. My apologies. This tabut, this will come to you. Within it will be what is left from Moses and Harun, and the angels shall bring this to you. And they see this coming in front of them, and then after this miracle, they accept that Talut or Saul is their king. And he marches with them, and he says, your first test will be your first test is you will come to a river, and this is the river Jordan. And whoever drinks from this river will not continue with me, and those who will not shall continue with me, except those who will just take one sip. The Ark of Covenant was the word of the Tabut. My apologies. Yes, many of you have written Tabut Sakina. Yes, the Ark of Covenant. And the angels carried this, and then they accepted him as king. So they march and they come to this river. This was their first test. And actually, we can learn quite a lot of lessons. Why is the Quran mentioning these stories? And we can leave this to the questions and answer section. I will try to cover as much as we can from the early history. And then during the questions and answers, why is this story important and how can it be reflected within our lives today? This story is extremely important. Do not drink from this water. The water is halal, and they've been marching for days and they need water. Why are they not allowed to drink water? And most of them rebel against this command and they drink from this water. And the Quran says they all drank except for a very few that they did not drink. And the number of those who did not drink is the same number as those who continued with Talut is 300. In a hadith, they are the same number as those who fought with the Prophet in the Battle of Badr. So only 300 men from hundreds of thousands, according to some tafsir, or tens of thousands, have continued with Talut to fight the Canaanite polytheist king Jalut. And this battle took place after they crossed the river Jordan, and it was a very difficult battle. And most of them said, there is no way we will be able to defeat with 300 men. You might have watched the film 300 and fantasies and the mythology that is based around the story. But this is a real story, according to the Quran, that took place. 300 men, believing men, 300 Muslims, fought against the polytheist Canaanite king Jalut. And the one that defeated him and the one that stood and fought this king was a young man, a teenager. His name was Dawood. And Dawood fought Goliath or Jalut in the Quran with a stone and killed him. And they were able to be victorious and to enter this land. And from that time, they were able, the prophet Dawood was chosen as a prophet. He was just a normal man, and he was chosen as the new king. So God chose him and gave him wisdom and gave him power. And now we have the first prophet king in history. And he ruled all over the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, and also his son, Sulaiman. And the Quran gives a lot of detail about the story of Sulaiman. And God gave him the strength of the wind, that he was able to travel the distance of a month's journey, so about 1,500 kilometers with the speed of the wind over a short period of time, over an hour of the morning or an hour of the evening, as the Quran says. وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ عَاصِفَةً تَجْرِي بِأَمْرِهِ إِلَى الْأَرْضِ الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا. We gave Sulaiman the power of the fiercing wind, carrying him to the land which we have blessed. And other verses talk about وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ غُدُوُّهَا شَهْرٌ وَرَوَاحُهَا شَهْرٌ. The journey of a month he covers within an hour of the morning, and another in the afternoon he covers within an hour also this journey. So today, to us, traveling the distance of a month within an hour is feasible with airplanes. But at that time, you might say the Quran talks about this as something that Sulaiman had this great power and this great kingdom. And the Quran also talks about this story with the Queen of Sheba that comes from Yemen and comes and accepts Islam and accepts the sovereignty of Sulaiman in Bayt al-Maqdis. The Quran also talks about how he had so many powers and was able to hear the animals and speak to them. All this detail is covered within the Quran quite extensively. However, the Quran also talks about that the children of Israel will rule this land twice, and in their this ruling, they shall cause mischief and they shall have great power. In the 5th verse or the 4th verse of chapter 17, Surah Al-Isra, the Quran says, and we decreed to the children of Israel in the scripture, in the Torah, that you shall indeed rule and work corruption in the land twice, and you shall ascend to exceeding heights. And this has happened only once in history before, particularly after the time of Prophet Sulaiman and Dawood. Bani Israel then were divided into two kingdoms, and they ruled this land, and they caused a lot of mischief, and they reached exceeding heights. They became very powerful. And the Quran continues to say that the first promise, when the time of the first of the two promises had come, they caused a lot of mischief in the Holy Land, in the land of Palestine, and God sent against them servants of His, of great might, who ransacked the city, ransacked the people, and it was a promise that has happened before, a promise already fulfilled. And all the Mufassirin, all the classical Mufassirin say this happened in the year 586 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar came from Babylon, and many archaeological discoveries say that he was a monotheist. He was a believer in Allah. He was sent to this land, and he ransacked the city, destroyed it, and destroyed the people, and started the first slavery of Bani Israel, or the Jews as they were known at that time after Moses. So we're talking about we started with the Jewish religion starting with Moses. This is after Moses died without entering the Holy Land, and then Yusha, his servant or his successor, entered Jericho, and then they were forced out of the land, and then they came back with Dawood. And then during the time of Dawood and Suleiman, the Bible talks about numerous things, that they were not prophets. In Islam, Dawood and Suleiman were prophets and at the same time kings. In the Torah, or in the Old Testament, it's talking about them as kings. And these kings were not they were not free from sin. Actually, they committed adultery and they committed shirk, associating with God, which is something that the Islamic narrative completely rejects, this biblical narrative, that they were righteous kings. But after them, then Bani Israel, or the children of Israel, then caused a lot of mischief in this land, and they were God sent against them, Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed them and wiped them out and took them into slavery into Babylon. The Quran covers this story from another angle. It talks about, in Surah Al-Baqarah, about a prophet, or a man, as the Quran calls him, أو كالذي مر على قرية, a man who passed by this city after it was destroyed. And he said, how will God bring back this city back to life again? So God makes him die, or puts him to sleep for 100 years, and then brings him back to life after the city has been brought back to life. And you can read this in Surah Al-Baqarah 259. From that time, this was the only time the children of Israel had sovereignty in this land. So after Dawood and Suleiman, they had sovereignty and they had a kingdom, and they ruled this land, but it was a very limited period of time until God sent to them Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and destroyed them. From that time, they were never able to recover again, and they were not able to become in sovereignty. Always after this is, we're talking about the about 800 BC. About 700 BC, they came back to this land under the different rulers. They were under the rule of the Greek in the 4th century BC. And at that time, this area was known as the land of Palestine. After that, the name land of Palestine was based on the Pilista tribes that moved from Crete, an island in the Mediterranean Sea, and they settled in the shores of the Holy Land. And then the name then became Palestine. During the Roman time, we will come to the Roman period, the area was under Roman sovereignty, and the Romans allowed some sort of religious autonomy to the children of Israel in the land, but they did not have sovereignty. So the sovereigns were the Roman emperors and Herod, the Arab king by descent, and he then became Jew. According to the Jewish narrative, he rebuilt what they call the temple. But we know that during that time, this is a time when Zachariah, the prophet, and was inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And the Quran covers this story in some detail, that Zachariah and Maryam, the story of Maryam, who her mother dedicates her as a gift to al-Masjid al-Aqsa. She dedicates her to be making i'tikaf in al-Masjid al-Aqsa while she was pregnant. And then when she is born, she finds it that she's a girl. And according to their laws, only men were able to make i'tikaf or to be dedicated to the masjid. So she says, Ya Allah, I've given birth to a girl, and a girl is not like a boy. And I've given her the name Maryam, as in Surah Ali Imran, the 3rd chapter of the Quran. And it gives a lot of detail. And then the different scholars fight Zachariah together with the other learned men, all compete to who will be her guardian. And then they cast their pens in the River Jordan. The Quran covers this story also, that they cast their pens in the river, and 3 times Zachariah is chosen. So Zachariah becomes her guardian, and he brings her. She is dedicated for worship of Allah in al-Masjid al-Aqsa in Bayt al-Maqdis. And when he brings her, this is the verse in front of you, when he brings her provisions, he finds that in the locked room that she was in, she already had a rizq or provisions from Allah. So she says, he says, how did this come to you? She says, it is from Allah. Indeed, he gives whomever he wants without reckoning. Zachariah then prays to Allah, and at a very old age, he says, Ya Allah, you accept the prayers, please give me a son. And although his son was, his wife was barren, she was not able to conceive children, God gives him the glad tiding while he is in his mihrab, that God gives him Yahya, John the Baptist, as he's known within the Christian literature. And the Quran also in chapter Maryam talks about that she used to be in her mihrab, and the angel came to her, and she then conceived Jesus and withdrew to a distant place. First, it says in an easterly place in the Masjid al-Aqsa, and the second, she goes out of the mosque and she gives birth at the trunk of a palm tree. And the Quran covers this story within some detail until you know the rest of the story of both Yahya, Zachariah, Maryam, and Isa. Isa is a prophet who comes according to the New Testament. He comes to guide the lost sheep of the children of Israel. He comes with a new Sharia. He tries to guide them back to the right path. However, they repel against him and they try to kill him with the Romans. And the Quran refuses the Christian narrative that he was crucified. And the Quran clearly says neither he was crucified nor was he killed, but he was taken to Allah. He was taken to the heavens. After Isa alayhi salam is taken, and after the death of Zachariah and Yahya, two great events take place. Titus comes and destroys the city and expels the Jews and murders them in 70 after Christ, after Isa alayhi salam. And then the second was Hadrian, who comes and destroys the city completely and rebuilds the city and establishes the city of Ilia. Ilia Capitolina is the city that he establishes, and Ilia is the region. So from the north, from Nablus, all the way to Hebron in the south, Jericho in the east, and Beit Jibril to the west. This region, about 40 Roman miles, he issues a decree. If a circumcised person, a Jew, would be found looking towards this land, he will be executed. So he expelled the Jews from this region, and from 132 all the way to the 7th century, no Jews were living in this area whatsoever. 500 years, the Jews were completely expelled, first by Hadrian, and then when he rebuilt the city, he built it as a Roman city, and then when Elia or Jerusalem became Byzantine, became Christian, also the Christians continued this decree of not allowing the Jews to enter into this land. This is what Elia would have looked like. Today, the main gate to the city of Jerusalem is known as Bab al-Amud, the gate of the pillar, or Damascus Gate. The reason why it's called the Gate of the Pillar, because there was a massive pillar placed in front of the gate, as the Romans have done with that. This was the area that they were forbidden to enter, the area of Elia, and this ban extended for many years. It is forbidden for all circumcised persons to enter or stay within the territory of Elia. Any person contravening this prohibition will be put to death, and the Romans took this very seriously. Then Elia becomes Christian in the 4th century when Helena, the emperor's mother, Constantine, she becomes Christian, and then Constantine becomes Christian in the 4th century. Then they were the city, you can see in this map here. This is the Madaba Map. This is an important map from the 6th century. It shows the main churches. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. This is the Nia Church. This is the main road. This is the gate of Al-Amud, or the Gate of the Pillar. The area of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa was left outside the city. It was left in ruins, and no one was there within this. For 500 years, the area of Al-Aqsa Mosque was in ruins. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulcher you see, and the church, the Nia Church, or the new church, built after the Roman Empire became Christian. So it became Byzantine, the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire. And this is what the city would have looked like. And the area of Al-Aqsa Mosque, the walls were still there in ruins, but the area was left outside the city. From the 4th century all the way to the 7th century, it continued as the Byzantine state. And the last topic we will cover today is the Byzantine-Persian Wars. The Byzantine-Persian Wars took place in the beginning of the 7th century. The Persians came across from Persia all the way to Anatolia. They took all the major cities, and then they moved southwards. They took Aleppo, Damascus, and then they took the city of Elia, the city of Jerusalem, Bayt al-Maqdis, and then they continued to Egypt and North Africa, and even they reached the walls of Constantinople. They took the city of Elia in the year 614, and this is after the prophethood of Muhammad, and this is a topic we will discuss in our next class. The early Muslims were very much interested in this war, and they followed what was happening, and the news of these wars was quite important to them. The Persians were joined by the Jews. The Jews rejoiced at taking revenge from the Romans and the Byzantines, because they have been banned from the city for 500 years. Now it is time to take revenge from the Romans, Byzantines, and now Christians. And what they did, this is from an eyewitness account that you can see in front of you. What happened is they detested the Christians. They purchased, after the Persians took the city, destroyed the churches, the Jews joined them, burned the churches, and they would go and buy Christians with their money and give the silver or gold to the Persians, and slaughter the Christians like sheep. They had so much hatred against the Christians, and because they were Byzantines and they were Romans, and they have expelled them from this land over a period of 500 years. The Jews will go and demolish with their own hands and burn the churches and buy Christians and slaughter them by their tens and hundreds, and many of them were slaughtered. When the Christians, Byzantines, came back after Emperor Heraclius managed to defeat the Persians, they took the city in 628. They did the same to the Jews of what they had done before them, and they massacred the Jews. Although Heraclius gave them safety that they will not be harmed, but after they took the city, the priests and the Christians said to Heraclius, they did this to us, and we will do the same to them. And they killed them and they slaughtered them within that city and across the whole region. Up to here, we've covered quite a lot of the history of Bayt al-Maqdis. We've covered, let's go back to the timeline, if you allow me just to run through it very quickly. Yes, we've covered from a history from 12,500 BC all the way to the 7th century within 1 hour. We've covered tens of thousands of years within a very short period of time. It's a very important topic to see the background of the history. From next week, we will start with Prophet Muhammad and his relationship with this land, and what lessons we can draw for us to understand the history of Bayt al-Maqdis and the relationship between the early Muslims, the followers of Muhammad, and this land. And then we will, over the next few classes, bring it from the 7th century to the modern period, and how things have developed over this time. I hope I know it's been intense, covering the Natufians, the Canaanites at the time of the prophets. We talked about Ibrahim, Ishaq, Yaqub, Yusuf, Musa, Yusha, Sulaiman, Dawood, numerous prophets in between, Zechariah and Yahya, and we've come to the 7th century. This is at the time of, we mentioned the Natufian, the Canaanites, the Yabusis, the Hyksos, the pharaohs who ruled in this land, Jebusites, the time that the Israelites ruled in this land for a short period of time, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greek. We talked about briefly about the Greek. We talked about the Babylonians, the Romans, Byzantines, and the Persians. I know it's been there's quite a lot within this discussion, talking about all these different nations and all these different people who ruled in this land during this time, ruling within the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, or the Holy Land, over this period. Quite a substantial time in history. If we can open it now for questions and see what you guys have learned. If you have any questions that we can discuss over the next half an hour or 40 minutes, that will be great. So over back to you, inshallah.
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Khalid, for that interesting and informative and fascinating lecture. We have 2 questions so far. I'll start off with the first one, inshallah. The first question says, at what time was Masjid Al-Aqsa built based on scientific calculation?
Okay, very, very good question. On this answer, we don't have a direct answer. The reason why we don't have an answer for this is, according to archaeology today, the walls of Masjid Al-Aqsa date to the Roman period. And if I can share the screen again, yes, from this image here, if you can see the image that I'm looking at just now, are you able to see it, or is it not clear?
We can't see
Not
it
yet. Okay, let me share it again. I thought the screen was still okay. Yes. So can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes. So the walls of Masjid Al-Aqsa, according to archaeology, existed from the Roman period, before the time of Isa alayhi salam. So we're talking BC. These walls exist, according to archaeological studies. The western wall, the southern wall, and the eastern wall of Masjid Al-Aqsa existed from before the time of Prophet Muhammad and before the time of even the birth of Jesus. Also, archaeological discoveries have shown that the wall of Masjid Al-Aqsa here, the eastern wall, dates back to the Greek period. We're talking about the 4th century BC. However, dating the walls is not, you cannot really date it from stone. So they're basing this on various discoveries that they have discovered around the wall at that time. However, what we talked about last week is that the foundations of Masjid Al-Aqsa are facing towards the Kaaba. And if they are facing towards the Kaaba, I don't know if we talked about the, I will show you an example of this. Again, I will share the screen again. We talked about that Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, the walls of it existed. These walls, these are the remains of the walls that we know of today that have existed from the Roman period. Part of this wall dates to the Greek period. The western wall of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa has one stone. The size of this stone is about 11 meters long. And this stone is facing towards the Kaaba. The Romans, the Kaaba has no significance to them. So they must have built it based on earlier foundations that existed before. So in terms of scientific, the earliest we can date the walls of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is to the 4th century BC. However, these have been built on earlier foundations because we know that the Romans and the Greek had no significance of the Kaaba, nor did the Jews have any significance to the Kaaba. So whatever was built in this area was built as a masjid, was built as a mosque. So we know that this area was a mosque prior to that time, but we are unable to date it scientifically. The Muslim narrative says that this goes back all the way to the first human on Earth. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. Moving on to the second question. It says, you mentioned that the children of Israel will rule Bayt al-Maqdis twice. The first one was during the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam's time. Can you please tell us when the first one ended and what caused it to end?
Yes, very good question, Faika. The first mischief, the Quran talks about a prophecy that is mentioned in the Old Testament, in the Torah, that the children of Israel will rule this land twice, and they will reach very big heights, and at the same time they will cause mischief. So they will reach very high level of power. This time they will cause mischief. The first one is after the time of Sulaiman, when they went off track. Prophet Sulaiman and Dawood kept them on track on Islam, and after them they went off this track, and this is why they were punished. This is how the Quran describes it, and there's a similar description that even the Bible talks about this in a lot of detail. They went to there was prophets amongst them. They used to kill even their prophets in the Quran. The Quran says the prophets amongst them, like Daniel and others, were not able to protect them against, and they kept telling them to come back to the right path, but they continued to refuse. They were destroyed. This destruction happened at the time of Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. So this is the first time after, not during the time of Dawood Sulaiman, after Dawood and Sulaiman, because it says they will have a great power and at the same time cause fasad, cause mischief. So this finished during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, and they were expelled from this land, and they were taken as slaves to Babylon, and this continued for 100 years. After they came back from this exile, they would not have power or sovereignty in this land. They were never able to create an independent state until the modern time. I hope that also answers the question.
Yes, thank you. We have a few more questions coming in. Next question is, what is the significance of Al-Aqsa to the Jewish religion, and what is meant when the Jews say that they want to build the third temple there?
Yes, good question from Boston Fox. The area of Masjid Al-Aqsa was important to Jews because they regard it as the site of the first temple. Even in the Old Testament, it talks about Abraham. This is the foundation stone where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. The Muslim narrative, the Islamic narrative, is that it was not Isaac, it was Ismail, and it was in Mecca. And even the Bible talks about it, that his first son, and the first son definitely was not Isaac, the first son was Ismail. So the significance they try to carry even before Judaism related to Abraham, and to say that this place was important to Abraham, and this is the place where he was going to sacrifice his son. During the time of Solomon, they claim that Solomon created the first temple over the site of Al-Aqsa Mosque. It starts with David, who tries to buy this land from the Arnona, the Jebusite. He tries to buy this land from him to create a place of worship for God. So it was already important to the Canaanites and the Jebusites before Ibrahim, and even before David and Solomon. They claim that Solomon created the first temple. The problem with the Bible, it talks about this temple in a way. It is similar to Babylonian temples in Iraq. So because the Torah was lost during that period and it had to be rewritten, so it seems to have been rewritten to reflect this idea. They also believe that it was the site of the second temple, built by Herod, the king that I mentioned. He was an Arab ethnically, and he converted to Judaism, and then he built the second temple during the time of Zechariah and Yahya. And they talk about the building of a third temple over the site of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And this is shared also by Christian Zionists, who also want to build a temple, a Jewish temple, over the site of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa in order for the Messiah to come back. So this is their narrative. that they are believing that the area of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa is the area of a temple. However, our Jewish archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists, have been doing excavations and digs underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa from 1967. They've not even been able to find one trace that traces anything to this so-called temple. In the Muslim narrative, Sulaiman alayhi salam has rebuilt Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, renovated the area of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, but it was already in existence years before he even came. And this is the idea within the Jewish and Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists, or even Jews today, believe that the temple needs to be built. However, most of them believe that it will be God that will bring it down from the sky. It will be God that will build it. However, many extremist fanatical Jews today have the Temple Institute and Temple Mount Faithful. All of them are calling for the destruction of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and the rebuilding of a Jewish temple over its site. I hope also that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. The second question is nice and simple. What two gifts did Salah ad-Din bring to Al-Aqsa?
Okay, what are the gifts Salah ad-Din brought to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa? Salah ad-Din brought two great gifts to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. We will discuss them in detail when we come to Salah ad-Din and the Crusades. But briefly, he brought rose water presented to him by the woman of today's southern Turkey, Diyarbakir in southern Turkey, to cleanse the rock after it's been desecrated by the Crusaders for 88 years and used as a church. So to cleanse this area, and he used this rose water that was made by the woman of Diyarbakir. The second was the minbar, or the pulpit, built by his mentor or teacher, Nuruddin Zinki, who never saw the liberation of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, but prepared this wonderful gift for Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. And he brought it from Aleppo in Syria and brought it and placed it in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa until it was burned by a Christian Zionist in 1969, when he attempted to destroy Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa based on a Christian Zionist prophecy that the building of the temple is coming near. So they tried to burn Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and destroy it with the help of some Jewish Zionists. And they were not successful, but they managed to destroy massive parts of Al-Jami' Al-Aqsa, the building with the copper dome or the silvery dome, and also the minbar of Nuruddin that was brought by Salah ad-Din was destroyed.
Right, thank you for that, Dr. Khalid. The next question says, while Bayt al-Maqdis was the center of the power of the conflict, how was the Arabian Peninsula situation, and was there any connection between people from those holy sites?
Can you repeat the question? There's a lot within that.
While Bayt al-Maqdis was the center of power, or the center of the conflict, how was the Arabian Peninsula's situation, and was there any connection between people from those holy sites?
I'm not sure which period are we talking about in this. Does the question say, or it's a general question?
No, it's general.
Yes. If we take it, for example, during the time of Prophet Abraham, there was a connection between Bayt al-Maqdis and Mecca. And we know that this connection continued with the travels of Ibrahim between Bayt al-Maqdis and Mecca, between the Holy Land and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in one side, and the sacred or the land of the Haram in Mecca, and the rebuilding of the Kaaba, and having two of his sons being the start of the start of nations within this area. Ismail in Arabia, and on the other side we have Ishaq, and then Yaqub, and then Yusuf, and then moving to Egypt. However, for example, during the time of Prophet Sulaiman, years later, actually during the time of Prophet Musa, while in the wilderness, the Sahih hadith, that he also went, he was at the borders of the Holy Land. He never entered the Holy Land, but he went to Mecca, and he made Hajj and pilgrimage according to Sahih hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he died with his last wish to be as close to the Holy Land as possible. At the time of Prophet Sulaiman, we know that there was a connection between Prophet Sulaiman and Arabia, particularly southern Arabia, between the Queen of Saba, Queen Bilqis, Queen of Sheba. She came to Bayt al-Maqdis, and Prophet Sulaiman brought her throne, and she accepted and submitted to him, to his sovereignty, and accepted also Islam as her religion. After this, when we come to the Roman period, the Romans had a buffer state between them and Arabia, the Ghassanid Christians, particularly during the Byzantine period. And they did not have much interest in Arabia. However, what we ended with was the Persian Byzantine wars. The early Muslims in Arabia were very much interested with what was going on, particularly in the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, and we'll discuss this in some more detail. The question is very general, so I hope I've managed to answer the question.
Yeah, I think that was a clear answer. Jazakallah khairan, you covered most of the times. The second question says, when the city was destroyed numerous times and Jews were expelled, were the foundations of Bayt al-Maqdis destroyed, or was this area always regarded as sacred by everyone?
Very good question from Hanifa. When the city was destroyed, particularly now coming to this, the last time it was destroyed during the Roman period, during the time of Emperor Hadrian, he destroyed the city completely, rebuilt it, and gave it his own name. Helios Hadrianus, he gave it his name, and then it was a pagan city. The area of Masjid Al-Aqsa was left outside the walls of the city, so it had no importance and no significance. And this continued until Umar ibn Khattab came and revitalized the area of Masjid Al-Aqsa. So for 5 centuries, this area had no significance whatsoever, and the foundations of the masjid stayed, of the mosque, but the city, the foundations were destroyed, rebuilt again as Elia, but the foundations of the mosque were there in ruins, but they were not rebuilt until Umar ibn Khattab came and rebuilt them. So I hope that's a short and clear answer to this.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan. I think the last question we have is the next one. When we look at history, Jews were banished from the land all the time. Then why did they always return if they were banished?
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, when we look at the Jews and their relation with Bayt al-Maqdis, it's a limited time. It was not always there, but we've covered it, and maybe we gave it too much coverage within our discussion. But you need to remember the Jewish relation with this land only starts with Moses. Before this, there was no Jews, before the time of Moses, and there was no Jewish religion. So we're talking about roughly about 1200 BC, the start of a connection between Jews as a religion with this land. And the Quran gives a lot of coverage to this. And why does the Quran give coverage to this? We said we can discuss it during this time, but it's they refused to enter this land when Moses told them to enter it. And all this generation that refused to enter, none of them were able to enter into this land. They all died in the wilderness. So they refused. They did not want to enter. They refused entry. During the time of Joshua or Yusha, they entered and they caused problems. So then they were expelled from this land. Then they came to the Prophet and they said, we want to go back into this land, and we are willing to fight and make jihad and fight to gain the land, and will be righteous again. And then when push comes to shove, most of them run away. So then God establishes for them a king and a prophet, Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman at the same time, to establish the way for them. However, after the death of Sulaiman, they also went off track and they were forced out of this land. This connection that was created with this land created the yearning to this land. And even within the old or the Bible, it talks about Jews yearning while they were in captivity in Babylon, yearning to go back to this land and yearning to be righteous again. When they had the chance, also they misused it and were forced out. But for 500 years after Hadrian, Emperor Hadrian, forces them out of this land, for 500 years, they do not try to go back. Or at least we know that they have not, maybe the Romans would, we said, would not allow them, but we know that they did not try to settle within this land for 500 years until Umar ibn Khattab came and under the inclusive Muslim rule allowed them to live within this region. So they this is not we're talking about 1,000 years, 500 of which they did not live within this land or did not try to live within this land.
Jazakallah khairan, Doctor. That was the last question of the session. I hope everyone benefited today. For everyone attending, we have pinned the attendance form in the chat. Inshallah, if you can all fill that in to take in your attendance. We will send the link to the next session via email. So if everyone could just keep an eye out and check your junk mail because it might go there. Jazakallah khairan, Doctor, once again for giving the lecture and answering the questions. And inshallah, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time at the same time, inshallah.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who was attending attentively and all the questions that have come through. And I know that within 1 hour to cover a period of thousands of years is difficult. So I recommend that everyone maybe watch this again and try to pick up points, and hopefully we can discuss this. And if there are any questions still there, we can discuss them in at another time. And read as much as you can on this. The problem that we have is that most of the sources in this early period is written by Israeli and Zionist scholars or Orientalist or biblical scholars. So there is a lot of misinformation here. So you need to be careful while you are reading this, to read this within, we're looking at this discussion within the Muslim narrative. So to try to keep this discussion within this timeline that the Quran draws, which is unfortunately a timeline that is not given much attention, and to give this Islamic narrative within this story. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you for sharing and taking the questions and engaging with the audience, and thank you to the audience for their for the questions.
Right. Thank you.